Everything Blake Lively has built, her reputation, her image as the golden Hollywood star, the carefully crafted narrative of victimhood, could all collapse because of one thing: her own words. In a newly unsealed deposition, Blake was asked simple, direct questions, and her answers? They weren't bombshells, they weren't proof of a smear campaign. They were embarrassing contradictions, admissions of forgetfulness, and repeated phrases like "I don't know" that left even her own lawyers scrambling to object. This wasn't the powerful actress in control of her story. This was someone fumbling through sworn testimony, unable to back up the very claims that have fueled headlines for months. And the consequences? If the judge sees what everyone else now sees, that she has no evidence, the case could collapse entirely. But the most shocking part, the very deposition Blake thought would protect her, might be the one thing that destroys her credibility forever. For weeks, the media has been spinning headlines like candy. Explosive new texts prove a smear campaign. Blake Lively targeted in Hollywood conspiracy. The stories sound dramatic. They're designed to. But here's the truth. The so-called bombshells crumble when you look at what's actually in the filings. Instead of exposing some grand plot against her, the evidence reveals something very different. When Justin Baldoni's team asked the judge to unseal more of Blake's deposition, they weren't bluffing. They knew what those transcripts contained. Not proof of a campaign, not proof of defamation, but proof that Blake had no idea what she was talking about. And when those pages became public, the story flipped. Suddenly, instead of looking like a victim of Hollywood sabotage, Blake looked like someone inventing narratives she couldn't back up. But that was just the beginning. Because once the deposition started, everything unraveled in real time. Jed Wallace, the PR powerhouse Blake tried to drag back into this case, sat across from her with his attorney. The lawyer asked what seemed like a simple question: "Can you identify anything Mr. Wallace has authored that's defamatory or disparaging about you?" Blake's response: "That's happening currently." So the lawyer pushed further. "Currently? Okay, let's start there." And Blake admitted, "I don't read news about me. I don't go on social media. Personally, I don't have knowledge." No, that was her answer, under oath. The attorney pressed again, asking her to cite a single article, a single post, anything Wallace had personally authored, and her answer was the same: she couldn't. She stumbled, she hesitated, she admitted, "I can't cite a specific article." This wasn't a witness dropping bombshells. This was a Hollywood star cornered, repeating "I don't know" like a broken record. And every time her lawyer tried to object to save her, Blake kept talking anyway, digging herself deeper. But that wasn't the worst of it. Because when the deposition turned to her role as producer of It Ends With Us, the cracks in her credibility only grew wider. Think about it. Blake Lively wasn't just the star of It Ends With Us. She was also credited as a producer. That title is supposed to mean you're involved. You know dates, locations, key details. You're hands-on. But under oath, Blake admitted she couldn't remember when filming started. She guessed May 2023. She wasn't sure. She couldn't even say where filming happened. First she said California, then New Jersey. Then she admitted she didn't know about other locations at all. The attorney asked if she was aware of additional photography, scenery shots, background inserts. Blake shrugged it off. "I don't. A producer who doesn't even know where her own movie was filmed. That isn't just embarrassing, it's suspicious. It makes her look uninvolved, uninformed, and untrustworthy." And yet this wasn't even the most damaging admission she made that day. Because when the conversation turned to the alleged smear campaign, Blake's testimony went from clueless to almost unbelievable. In her amended complaint, Blake accused Wallace and Baldoni's camp of running an astroturfing campaign to bury her. Strong words, dramatic imagery. So the attorney asked, "What do you mean by bury?" Blake's lawyer objected, but Blake answered anyway. She claimed the term came from Baldoni, Jennifer Abel, and Melissa Nathan, that they used words like bury when talking about her. The attorney clarified, "You didn't take that to mean they'd physically bury you, did you? You understood that was reputational?" And Blake said yes, but then added something shocking. She testified that when Steve Sarowitz allegedly said there will be 2 dead bodies by the time I'm done with us, she took it literally. She thought her life was in danger. Now think about that. On one hand, she admits she doesn't even read articles about herself. On the other, she claims offhand remarks made her fear for her safety as a mother. To the jury, it doesn't make sense. It sounds exaggerated, paranoid, and most importantly, it undermines her credibility. But that wasn't the end. Because the more she spoke, the more it became clear, this smear campaign existed mostly in one place, Blake's own head. Here's the contradiction that blew this case wide open. Blake testified, under oath, that she doesn't read articles about herself. She doesn't scroll social media. She doesn't even engage with coverage of her own career. Yet somehow, she claims to know there's a coordinated campaign against her. When pressed, she admitted she couldn't identify any specific articles or posts by Jed Wallace. Not one. The only thing she could say was that her understanding from documents was that Wallace was involved in some campaign. But what documents? She couldn't name them. What articles? She couldn't recall them. What proof? None. It was speculation, hunches, a storyline without evidence. And that's the irony. The very narrative she's been pushing in the press that she was the victim of a smear campaign crumbled when she had to actually explain it in court. For the first time, we saw that the smear campaign wasn't something Wallace orchestrated, it was something Blake projected. But while she was digging herself into that hole, another battle was unfolding, one that pulled in Leslie Sloan, the Daily Mail, and a journalist who couldn't keep his story straight. Leslie Sloan, Blake's longtime PR fixer, demanded her legal fees be covered. Her argument? She'd been unfairly dragged into Baldoni's lawsuit, and a journalist, James Vituska from the Daily Mail, had the receipts to prove it. But there was a problem. Vituska's sworn statements weren't consistent. In June, he said one thing. By August, he'd changed his story. That inconsistency became a weapon. Baldoni's team jumped on it, saying his credibility was unreliable, and Sloan's entire argument collapsed. Even worse, Baldoni's lawyers pointed out that Sloan cherry-picked texts to create her narrative. She took a single message, pulled it out of context, and used it as if it proved defamation. But defamation cases don't rest on one text. They rest on patterns, schemes, coordinated actions. And Baldoni's side argued Sloan, Blake, and even Ryan Reynolds were part of a larger plan, planting stories in the New York Times, whispering false misconduct claims to reporters, and fueling a PR campaign designed to sink Baldoni's career. Instead of making Sloan look like a victim, the filings made her look like a key player in the smear campaign Blake swore she was the victim of. And if Sloan goes down, so does Blake. But the drama didn't stop there. Because while Blake's team scrambled to keep their story intact, another storm was brewing. And this one involved Perez Hilton. Perez Hilton has been many things in his career. Blogger, celebrity gossip king, media troublemaker. But one thing he's never been accused of is shying away from controversy. And now, he's right at the center of Blake's legal war. Perez was subpoenaed, just like other creators. And now Blake's team is trying to argue he's not a journalist. Why? Because if he's not a journalist, they can strip him of reporter's privilege and demand he expose his sources. But here's the contradiction. Blake's lawyers can't have it both ways. They say Perez isn't a journalist, but then they demand his sources as if he is one. So what is a journalist? Someone with a press pass? Someone who writes for the New York Times? Or someone like Perez, who's been reporting celebrity news online for 2 decades? The answer matters, not just for Perez, but for every content creator covering Hollywood. Because if Perez is declared not a journalist, then anyone with a YouTube channel, a blog, or even a TikTok account could lose the protections that shield reporters. And suddenly, this case isn't just about Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. It's about free speech. It's about whether independent voices have the same rights as traditional media. If the judge rules against Perez, it won't just silence him. It could set a precedent that silences an entire generation of digital journalists. And that's why what happens next could reshape this entire feud.